Hey there Cosmic Warriors, and welcome back to another video. Okay, so in today's video we are going to be taking a look at how you can find children and pregnancy using astrology. So we're going to be performing another birth chart deep dive. However, before we do get started, definitely make sure that you give this video a like if you like it. Also make sure to subscribe if you have not already, and to of course click that little bell icon so that you can keep yourself updated with further content from myself. And one more quick thing I would like to mention, and that is that I have some really nice merchandise pieces available on my Teespring. So if you're interested in picking up one of those pieces, then definitely go to the link in the description box below. Okay, so with all of those introductions out of the way, let's do this. Okay, so first and foremost, in today's video, I'm going to be sharing where you can locate children and pregnancy within the birth chart, but in another video, I'll be sharing when you might become pregnant or have a child according to astrology. Though I just feel like I need to add this. This is my own analysis, but also feel free to add any important or interesting points to the discussion in the comment section down below as well, because, you know, we're all learning here. We're all learning. All right, so let's get into this. The first main house that I want to focus on today is the 5th house within the birth chart, because the 5th house rules over children along with our sexual expression. It can pertain to the types of children that we create, along with what our children mean to us as parents, as well as the type of experience that we have as parents. Now, these theories I discovered through Howard Sasbertaz's book, The 12 Houses, but I want to explore these theories a little bit more. So firstly, let's address the types of children that you might have according to the 5th house. Well, we'll go into some examples here. Let's say you have Taurus ruling your 5th house. Then maybe your children will have Taurus placements within their own birth chart, such as them having a Taurus sun, moon, or rising, or maybe they'll be dominant in Taurus, or they could very well be dominant in Venus within their chart. And this is quite interesting because I have a close friend with Taurus ruling the 5th house, and she has a son who is dominant in both Venus and Taurus, and her son also has a Taurus moon. But then another example here could be you having Aquarius ruling your 5th house. Then maybe your children will have Aquarius placements, such as that Aquarius sun, moon, or rising, or they may be dominant in Aquarius, or they may be dominant in Saturn or Uranus, which is also quite interesting because I have another friend with Aquarius ruling the 5th house, and her daughter is an Aquarius with the sign of Aquarius pretty dominant within her chart. Actually, come to think of it as well, her daughter also does have a strong influence of Saturn and Uranus within her chart too. And I also feel like I should mention that my mum, she has Jupiter in Pisces in the 5th house in her natal birth chart. By the way, this is using the Placidus system for the purpose of this video, okay? So as I say, she has Jupiter in Pisces in the 5th house, and I was born with Jupiter in the 12th house conjunct my ascendant in Virgo. So that's another interesting one there. And then my boyfriend's mother, she has Gemini ruling the 5th house, and he has his moon in Gemini, and he's also dominant in the sign of Gemini. And what I also find interesting about this part, right, going off the Gemini theme, is that my boyfriend has one other sibling. So therefore his mother has given birth to 2 children throughout her life. And the reason why I bring this up is because Gemini represents duplicity. It's all about being multifaceted. So perhaps, quite perhaps, if you have Gemini ruling the 5th house, or Gemini in that 5th house, or Mercury in the 5th house, then it could be an indication that you'll have 2 children throughout your life, or maybe you'll have twins. And then going back to my mother's chart, my mother, she has given birth to 6 children. Keeping in mind that Jupiter is all about expansion and growth. Basically, Jupiter expands whatever it touches within your birth chart. So if you do have Sagittarius ruling the 5th house, or if you have Sagittarius in that 5th house, or Jupiter in the 5th, then this could be an indication that you'll have many children throughout your life. Though come to think about it as well, I am 95% sure that my sister has a Leo rising with the sign of Sagittarius ruling her 5th house, and she has 7 children. Yes, 7. But what if you are someone like me who has more than 2 planets within your 5th house? I actually have 4 planets within my 5th house, so a stellium. Well, if this is the case, you've gotta take everything into consideration. You've gotta read that 5th house energy by combining everything together, and also remember the sign that rules that 5th house for you as well. So for example, I have Capricorn ruling the 5th house with my ruler, which is Saturn, in the 5th house as well. So this definitely amplifies this. But yeah, my Saturn is in Aquarius in the 5th house. But then I also have Sun and Mercury in Aquarius there, along with Mars in Capricorn. Now, I am 28 and I'll be 29 in like a week. And I have not given birth to any children yet, which I think aligns pretty well with that Saturnian Capricorn energy. Also keeping in mind that Saturn is the traditional ruler of Aquarius. And of course, Saturn is all about limitations and restrictions and delays. And to be honest, having children is something that I'm very cautious of. I don't want to have children until I feel fully ready. I want to plan things very carefully. But maybe it could be suggested that I'll have 2 children throughout my life, or maybe I'll have twins, because like there's that Mercury energy there, or maybe my child will have Aquarius energy within their chart. Perhaps they'll have Capricorn or Aries there, or quite possibly maybe my child or children will have pretty dominant Sun energy, or Leo energy, because of course this is a lot of energy going into that 5th house. But who knows? I have to see, because I don't have any children. So that may be something to re-examine in the future. So on the other hand, it could be suggested that I'll experience delays when it comes to actually trying for a child. It could be the likes of maybe a miscarriage or just difficulty conceiving. I suppose that's why people say that children are such a blessing, because, well, there's no knowing 100% if we'll have a child. However, conception is more a subject that I want to dive deeper into within the 8th house segment of this video. Now, so far we have discussed females creating children, but what about males who create children? Well, it could also be suggested that men's 5th houses, they also correspond with their children's placements as well. So take my close friend, her husband, for example, he has the sign of Libra ruling his 5th house, and then his sun is also Libra dominant, and then Venus dominant. So keeping in mind here that these are all examples that I've been discussing so far throughout this video, and really it can play out in many different ways, and you also have to take into consideration the planets, the signs, aspects to planets, and also you got to take into consideration the ruler of your 5th house. So if it is that you have, say, Libra ruling your 5th house there, then it's good to locate Venus within your chart. Or if you have, say, the sign of Virgo ruling your 5th house there in your chart, then you got to locate Mercury, so on and so forth. And also remember here that the 5th house can be associated with the experience that we have as parents. So someone with Saturn or Chiron in Pisces in the 5th house, they will most likely experience their parenthood quite differently in comparison to someone with Sun or Moon or Venus in Cancer in the 5th house. The Pisces energy person, they might feel burdened by parenthood, for example, or they might feel emotionally drained as parents, or maybe they find it challenging and really difficult to live up to the responsibilities that come along with parenting. But then the Cancer energy person, perhaps they feel very deeply about being the best parent that they can be. Maybe they love that emotional bond that they have with their child, or maybe they're super cuddly and affectionate towards their children, or perhaps they're very, very protective of their children. But then also take someone, as another example here, who maybe has Mercury or Moon or Sun in Virgo in the 5th house. Perhaps this person worries quite a lot over whether or not they're being a good parent or if they're doing everything correctly. Maybe they really stress themselves out because they feel like they should be perfect for their child, or like they need to do things perfectly. Maybe it's important for them to develop a routine with their child, or just to have things in a certain way to make sure that their child lives a fulfilling life. Which I think what I just said there with Virgo ruling the 5th house, this kind of aligns with the close friend that I was talking about at the very beginning. The reason for why I say this is because yes, she has Taurus ruling her 5th house, but her Venus is in Virgo. So as I said, this is why it's also good to locate that ruler of the 5th house within the birth chart for more information. Though kind of just taking this a step back to the types of children that we have based on the 5th house, yes, I've talked about placements and those planetary positions between you and your child and how that can kind of unfold, but it's also good to apply your 5th house energy to just, well, the overall personality of your children, along with your own self-expression and your ego as an individual as well. Because remember that the 5th house within your own birth chart can show you your self-expression. It can show you your individuality. So if you have Aries ruling the 5th house, or if you have Mars in the 5th house, and you're the type of parent that is quite pushy and forthright with the intention of just really, really teaching your child to be independent and to stand on their own, well then it could be suggested that your child, they grew up with that independent streak as part of their personality. Or if you have Jupiter Jupiter in that 5th house, or Sagittarius ruling the 5th house, like my mother was Jupiter in the 5th house there, then maybe you're the type of parent who really instills religion onto your child, or you really try to instill your own belief system. You make sure to teach them about the things that you believe in. And so naturally, it could be suggested that your child grows up with the desire to teach as a part of their personality. So I kind of hope you get where I'm coming from with this. But then again, I suppose this also leads to the question between nature versus nurture, right? Because there are things that we act out, things that we do as children that we haven't necessarily learned, or we haven't really picked these things up from our parents or from our surroundings. So is it that these things belong to the 5th house? Just a question there. Or is it that these things are associated with the moon or with the 4th house within the birth chart? Keeping in mind that the moon and the 4th house is all about our upbringing. It's all about how we were nurtured. So seeing as I mentioned this, let's explore the moon. along with the sun for a moment, because it's the moon that can represent the mother figure, and then it's the sun that can represent the father figure within the birth chart. Though to be fair, Saturn can also represent the father, but we're going to focus more on the sun for the purpose of this video. So with that being said, it's really a good idea to locate both the sun and the moon for more insight into how you were parented and nurtured as a child. So if you have sun in Scorpio, making some really difficult, really heavy aspects to Saturn, for example, then maybe you perceived your father as domineering or as controlling, or maybe you felt like you can never live up to his very extreme expectations. Or if you have Sun in Taurus, making an opposition to Pluto, maybe you perceived your father as someone who struggled physically or financially, and so he was always working to fight for your family's security. But then let's say you have Moon in Aries, conjunct Venus there in Aries. Maybe you perceived your mother as a fighter and as a doer, or as someone who pushed to really protect and to provide and to support you and your family. Or if you have Moon in Gemini, conjunct Jupiter in Gemini, then maybe you perceived your mother as someone who was free-spirited and loud and enthusiastic and just very witty, just quick-witted, quick-minded. Or someone who simply wanted to teach you about the world in many different ways. Basically here, folks, by locating both the sun and the moon, you can gather more information when it comes to how you were parented and into how you were nurtured, along with how you might parent or nurture your own children. Which also, I suppose, seeing as I mentioned this, it might be a good idea, fun to look at your own child's chart. If you do have children, look to see where both the sun and the moon are located within your own children's chart for more of an insight there too. And this is also why progressions are important, because progressions can show you how you develop as a person over a longer period of time. So also just keep that in mind when it comes to progressions, because it may be that your parenting style is different with one child in comparison to another child, or it may be that how you change and grow as a person, that impacts then your decisions and your choices as to whether or not you even want to have children. So yeah, just remember that astrology is not this fixed study. It's always changing. But it's still that fifth house area that can focus on the experience that you have as a parent, along with what your children mean to you as a parent. And like I said, it's also good to look for the ruler or the rulers of the fifth house for more of an indication there too. So if you have Aries ruling the fifth house along with Mars in your 10th house, then quite possibly you'll push on your children to perform at their highest potential. Maybe you'll want them to be successful or to find a career or a profession that they're really, really passionate about. Or if you have Libra ruling the fifth house there along with Venus in the second house, then maybe you'll do everything within your power to provide for your children. Or maybe it's really, really important to you that they like you and that they can connect with you over similar interests. Though, just a quick theory here before we do move on. Is it possible here that if you have Moon in the fifth house, then you act more like your mother? But if you have Sun in the fifth house, then you act more like your father? I'm curious to know this. So if you do have Sun or Moon in your fifth house within your birth chart, then definitely let us know in the comment section if you act more like your mother or if you act more like your father. I know for me, I have both Sun and Saturn there in the fifth house according to the Placidus system. And yeah, I act so much more like my father. All right, so moving along. The next house that I want to address is the 8th house. And this is where we're gonna bring pregnancy more into play here, because it's the 8th house and the 5th house that are associated with our sexual expression, so being the 5th house, and then sexuality and intimacy being the 8th house. So whilst the 5th house placements can show us the reproducing or the creating of children, well, so can the 8th house placements, and this is because the 8th house rules over conception or the conceiving of a child. It rules over bonding and it rules over shared resources, including, well, the sharing of a child. So if you can kind of imagine the 5th house representing a couple creating a child together, but they aren't necessarily married. They're not sharing joint materials and resources. But then the 8th house, imagine representing a couple producing a child, creating a child, who are bounded by marriage. They are bounded by materials. Naturally, however, these things can differ, because it might be that a couple is living together and they have a child, but they aren't married. Or it might be a couple who are in a business relationship with one another and then they have a child. But again, marriage is not there, or there might not even be that romantic side of it involved. Basically here, folks, of course, it can play out in many different ways. So this is why it's good to consider both the 5th house and the 8th houses together, really, when it comes to conception and children. However, also keep in mind that, well, the creation of a child will automatically place a couple into the 8th house shared resources situation, regardless if they're married or not, because this couple are essentially now bounded together through their offspring. Still though, it's the 8th house that rules over the likes of conception. Therefore, the 8th house placements, your 8th house placements, can address the process of becoming pregnant. Now, with this, just remember that I'm going to be providing examples. These are simply theories, and take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. So, let's say you have Venus in Gemini in the 8th house. Then maybe you conceive a child more than once throughout your life. Or maybe you fall pregnant to more than one person. Or quite possibly you get more than one female pregnant. Or let's say you have Mars and Leo in the 8th house, then maybe you conceive a child very quickly, or maybe you do so without necessarily thinking about the consequences, because maybe for you, you enjoy having your own desires met, but can also be reckless in the process. Or let's say you have Neptune and Capricorn in the 8th house, then maybe there's some phobias, there's some fears you have over pregnancy or conceiving. Or yeah, maybe you just simply fear that you won't be able to conceive. Or perhaps having a child feels more like a dream to you than an actual reality. But then let's say you have Uranus and Aquarius in the 8th house, then maybe you fall pregnant suddenly, totally unexpectedly, or maybe you decide not to have children at all. You're like, I don't want any children, right? That's all good. You don't want that for yourself. Or maybe you simply prefer to adopt a child. Or quite possibly you conceive through the likes of IVF. Similar then to the 5th house, it's also good to locate the ruler of the 8th house along with aspects for more insight. So for me, I have Aries ruling the 8th house within my chart, and then I've got that Mars energy in Capricorn in the 5th, conjunct Venus and Neptune and Uranus there in Capricorn. And like I said earlier, I have not had any children yet, but I would say that I'm hoping that my moon energy, because I've got moon and Aries in the 8th, I hope that is an indicator of pregnancy for me whenever the time is right. Even on that note, this is also why it's so important to remember the likes of progressions, as I said there briefly earlier, and also remember transits and solar returns, because so much can change depending on what's happening there. So for example, if you have Uranus or Mars in your solar return chart, maybe you'll conceive a child that year. Or if you have Jupiter transit in your 8th house, maybe you'll bear a child during that transit. Or if you have moon, so the moon progresses into your 8th house, then maybe there's a chance of falling pregnant or getting somebody else pregnant. There's really just so many layers to consider when it comes to astrology, but it's those 5th house, 8th house areas that can provide information when it comes to pregnancy and children. These houses, they work as a team, along with the rulers of those houses, as well as planets located within these houses there too. Though another component just to consider when it comes to pregnancy is the moon. And this is because the moon can represent fertility. Now, I understand that this is probably a very sensitive area, especially for those of you who are trying to conceive out there but are struggling to do so. But I still think it's an interesting topic. Okay, so the moon is all about cycles, and interestingly enough, these cycles align with a woman's cycle. I know for myself that I went through a time period where I was ovulating during new moons, and then I would have my period during a full moon. Now, I'm not like that anymore. It's changed, which, to be fair, you know, women's cycles, they can change all the time. But for a while still this was happening. Though for you, maybe your cycle is completely different. But still, when it comes to fertility, maybe you're someone like my mom or like my sister, and you have Venus conjunct the moon, and so you're very fertile. Maybe it's easier for you to fall pregnant or to get somebody else pregnant. I mean, as I said there, my mother has had 6 children and my sister has had 7 children, and they both have Venus conjunct moon within their chart. So I'm not sure if there's any correlation there, but it's just a thought. But then let's say you're someone with Saturn and Chiron conjunct the moon, and you're not the most fertile. Maybe there's a difficulty with conceiving, or maybe there's a delay, or maybe there's a lot of fears that are holding you back from falling pregnant or from becoming a parent yourself. Essentially though, it's a good idea to locate the position of the moon when it comes to fertility and becoming pregnant. But the last and final house that I want to talk about today is actually the 12th house, and this is because the 12th house can be associated with the experience that our mother has whenever she was pregnant with us. Well, also along with our birth partly as well, because the birthing process is that threshold between the 12th and the 1st house. So if you're curious to know, try asking your mother about her pregnancy with you and see how that aligns with your 12th house. Though of course I do understand that this is more difficult for those of you who don't really talk to your mother often, or for those of you whose mothers are no longer alive, but it's still an interesting area to look into. And if you do fall pregnant and give birth to a newborn child, well, their 12th house can show you then, it can show you the pregnancy that you might have had whilst being pregnant with them. And interestingly, I do know somebody whose child has Saturn and Pluto in the 12th house, and she's told me that her pregnancy made her feel very restricted, where she didn't feel like herself. She's also told me that it was quite a traumatic experience for her, whilst also being a highly, highly transformative experience. Then again, perhaps you're someone who has the North Node in Cancer in the 12th house, and your mother was just so eager to give birth to you. She really wanted to meet you. For her, being a parent felt like it was destiny. Or maybe you're someone with Venus in Libra in the 12th house, and your mother was actually going through a separation or going through a divorce while she was pregnant with you. So yeah, these are all some cool things to consider when it comes to exploring the 12th house, especially given that the 12th house can also show us what's passed on to us from our mother through that interconnectedness that we share with her whilst we're in the womb. Though overall, when it comes to locating children and pregnancy, look to the 5th house, look to the 8th house, also look to the 12th house, and then look to see where both the sun and the moon are there within the chart, and also look into that 4th house. Now, I didn't really talk much about the 4th house today, but I do still recommend looking into it because of course it does rule over our family, and it rules over our home line, and it rules over our ancestry. So if you want to look into your family history, look into that 4th house energy. Okay then, Cosmic Warriors, so that concludes my very long video all about how you can locate children and pregnancy using astrology. Now, if you have any thoughts and opinions on today's video, then definitely let us know what you thought of the video in the comment section down below. And like I said at the very beginning, definitely feel free to share your thoughts that you want to add to the discussion. But with all that being said, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And of course, if you would like to see more videos from myself and you have not yet subscribed, then make sure that you click that subscribe button, and also make sure that you give this video a like, remember. And I will be back with another video very, very soon. Bye!